Now let's talk about those numbers. 462 people now hospitalized in Los Angeles County. That positivity rate jumped 3.7%, and on the 4th of July, it was only 1.5%.
The service, a deaf member service, a group got together. I believe it's in 2014, 2017, the board that was prior. That board had gone through, decided to hold the certification, and that really that was really the first big tumultuous point of RID when they decided to stop administering the certification. And then there's another incident that happened later with Reagan. and leadership, talking about leadership, that the leadership wasn't being respectful to deaf people who were involved in RID. So, for example, Paul worked with the board a lot to show that there wasn't show there was respect. And my grievance, I posted on Facebook discussing about my grievances from my experience with RID. That was in 2009. I'm not quite sure about the date, but it was in the fall. I'm not sure the exact date. And all that happened until the Black Lives when we were discussing about who to become president for RID. RID wrote a position statement strongly supporting the use of CDIs for for any political announcements. So RID went ahead with that position paper saying there should always be a CDI for this meeting, and it seemed that Dr. John that they ignored it to use a CDI in the meeting. So that started with confusion from there, and it became the arguments continued until the people running for president, me, Dr. Webb, and Priscilla, and so 3 of us were in the running. And Reagan Thibodeau was persistent, voting for her preference, and it was Priscilla. And when the results came out, neither deaf person won. So Reagan had a big uproar, and she started this whole war about that. We need like a deaf president now, and the behavior that she presented was clearly racist. And the RID board decided to resign. One by one, they all resigned. And so that's, in short, what's happened with RID. Why? Let me tell my name. I'm Pamela. And I apologize for the color here. I've been swimming. I didn't have time to change, so I apologize for the background. So I do apologize, and I hope all of that blind can see me. I just want to explain myself. My history with RID. RID was established because there was a national task force for interpreting. So that was in the 90s. We realized because there was so much autism for many years, the community felt there was so much autism, they weren't allowed into these communities, into RID. And for a long time, RIDs has a history of oppressing the deaf community. I was a coworker in the fall of 2019, and I was going through the normal process. I interviewed with a committee. I interviewed with the board. I interviewed with the staff at RID. I had 3 different interviews. And after all the interviews done, I was offered a job. But several things popped up during my interview with the staff. They said, "Are you going to move to Virginia?" We had talked about it before. Like we said, we would move later on after the school year. My son would have been fine, but the staff said, "Are you going to move? Are you going to? Oh, we're going to sell our headquarters." I said, "You're planning to sell a headquarters office. You haven't discussed that with your applicants, because I'm planning to move. I'm coming in from North Carolina. I had moved to my house, moved my family, and now you're saying that you're going to, you're selling that you're moving the headquarters So I negotiated with the board, and the board said, "Wait, we were planning to stay in Virginia, so I already had a house set up for me and my family in the works." So we discussed that arrangement, and they said when I would start. Many times during the month, I would go to Virginia, and I come to that agreement to do that. And then they told me 1/3 of my salary had been cut. They never advertised that, so it was no secret. They looked like they wanted the salary they wanted to give me was not. It was really not a raise, and because of that new turnover. And also during that process, I felt like I was looked down upon. The board would come into the office to observe what I was doing. The CEO and the board would come into my office and hover over me, like monitoring, like micromanagement, and that really wasn't professional. Then I've had I I know the heads of the board, their heads, but they said they need to be in Virginia. Just come in the office with no notice. And they said, well, we need to come to the office to supervise you. So that was quite insulting. And another thing, during the negotiating office, there's lots of negative things the staff did. I said, why are you sharing the information? And we've had a lot of negative experience with deaf, for instance, deaf staff have gotten fired. And that was confusing to me. I didn't know, I hadn't even started a job yet. The board should let me know they really shouldn't have told me who they had bad history with. I should have come in with my own decisions. So, but still, we negotiated. And always, these negative vibes. The second thing they said about laziness, one specific person needed to get fired. They had wanted to fire that person long ago, but that person was lazy, and they wanted to fire, but that person was in the network, and so I felt like they were taking advantage of me as a deaf person. So because I had never worked with that person before, I felt like it was hearing people telling me who to fire. But still, they were supervising me, and they told me how to take off part of my paycheck. So it really was not a very pleasant experience. So I resigned. Wow. Thank you, Pamela, for sharing your story. I learned, I just want to ask you a question. Do you feel like they were blackmailing you into these things? Is that part of the situation? Do you feel blackmailed? Why do they have to do those things? I don't understand. What was their purpose? How do they decide those things? Who was making the decision in the process? It looks like it should be, standard. Bylaws are standards that we vote on. But I'm wondering, what are these standards? What process do they look like? Because now I can see this whole kerfuffle. I understand what's going on, but what is the ideal situation? What are the in and outs of the process? What are they supposed to be doing? Well, I think the interview process itself went fine. The board made the decision about who to hire for their CEO. In my interview with the board, I didn't feel any negative vibes from that. Actually, for example, from the expressions and the language that they're showing, their whole vibe was they're willing to work with me. The problem for me happened when it came to the negotiation process. That was where all these negative aspects showed up. And that's when I felt like the board was watching over me. And I'd never been through a process like that with hearing people before. I thought with the headquarters. And then when they told me they were planning, they could have moved the headquarters during negotiations. They said, "Yeah, the CEO will guide you with that decision." And I said, "Sure, but you have to let all the candidates know. You really should let all the candidates know about this possible move." Because who knew how far they were going to move and where they were moving to? So that wasn't very truthful. So me doing that interview process was fine, but when it came to negotiations, that's where things really took a turn for the worse. They were not professional. They were very oppressive and very insulting. Yeah, Pamela, it looks like that interview went well. So the problem was at the end was at the negotiation. But there are rule lines that they have to follow. RAD must follow these guidelines, and it seems like those guidelines are oppressed Pamela. So she was set to fail. It looked like RD set Pam to fail. And almost behind the scenes, it looked like there was racism, like he didn't trust her issue. So trust was an issue as well, and integrity, honesty. So there were several issues in that story. It looks like, and it seems like RID, for them to cut $50,000, I would have been very angry over that. I would have been ticked off, of course. 150,000, you're cutting $50,000 off the salary. Any person who were doing all these jobs, any in the deaf community would feel the same way. Any deaf person would feel that way. It's ridiculous. So it's like she was set to fail, as the saying goes. Like she was set for failure. What I'm wondering is that if RID and this is the interpreter, the picture is kind of unclear and up. So Pam, we were talking about that underneath the racism was there. That did they recognize from the 50,000 cut that they were Pam, would they recognize that there was racism behind the reason why they cut your pay? And I guess it shows what RD really did to Pam and the way they demeaned you. And they really should apologize to you. Yeah, for me, it was a blessing. As you know, that the negotiation process was very clear. Oh, excuse me, not blessing. It was clear that what was behind the organization. The negotiating had a lot of red flags, with the expectation that I would do all the dirty deeds of firing people. When we all had the same ability, but it looked like they wanted to take advantage of me because I was a deaf person. They wanted me to fire other deaf people so they could keep their hands clean. I've never seen a person hired during an interview ask the manager personal revenge. I don't know what kind of history is. I mean, it just wasn't professional. And it wasn't just once that I saw it. I mean, during the negotiation, there were several, 4 times during this negotiation. And every time this thing came up about that person's name kept coming up, they kept mentioning this person's name, how they didn't like that person. It really wasn't professional for them to do that during my interview. And that was happening in the 1990s. And I knew what had happened in the past. The collaboration between NAD, which I represented, and RD, there was a big struggle. We had a lot of problems at the time. We were blunt. And to be honest with you, we were out with it. There was crying, and we came to the conclusion RD would be oppressive. And yes, RD had made some. We thought, okay, RD will make some improvements. And that was in 2004. In 2005, so things got better in 2005. I was looking for a challenge. I thought I would challenge it, and I would try it. And I'd asked by 2017, and at that time, no. So in 2019, I thought again, maybe it'll be better now. I thought maybe things had improved. But anyway, negotiation process, that happened in 2019. And what I found was nothing had changed. And the unfortunate thing about that time, in 2019, there were many people of color on the board. Autism was still there. The autism was still, and the racism was still there, excuse me. Ritchie. I think Ritchie was the one raising a hand. Great. Yeah, like you already saw in Pam's story, my point was that prior to now, there was racism at RID. And also, there had been autism. Since Reagan got involved with this whole thing, it became a full-blown racism. And it's what we call racism vortex. Basically, we just went and dived deep into the racism vortex. What Pam experienced, what I experienced, what several of the members on the RID board experienced, particularly people of BIPOC. What we saw Reagan do was complete, obvious racist behavior. Yes, autism is important, yes, but we need to back up. We can't push racism aside. When you look at the frame, is why is autism horrible? For example, if a deaf person lost their job because of racist or mentioned or behavior, you would say, sure. But when they're trying to find a job, the ability for them to grow and network is limited. They reach a ceiling, and it ruins the norm. Now, a hearing person, it doesn't matter if they're white or BIPOC. If they lose a job, it has nothing to do about racism. Racism is a factor for others. For white, but hearing people, it doesn't matter if they're BIPOC or white. A hearing person, as an example, what behavior on the performance of their job, if they lose their job, they have an easy way to network and find a way to get into the world. They have much more opportunities to get into the next job. So that's what is so different between these two. People tend to go into this racism vortex. And yes, racism is important, but so is autism. That's my point. Autism is just as important as racism. Yeah, Ritchie, what you just said. How can we improve and not break down the barrier job, right? The barrier of getting a job, but how can we give a chance? How can we this one thing's better? What can we do? And we just want you to improve upon it. And that's all for discussion. Yeah, I can give you an answer. My immediate answer We deaf community are very strong in forgiving. We tend to forget a lot. When someone hurts us, we forgive them. We forgive them. Any deaf white person or something that makes a comment, we should say something. Why can't we, whether white deaf person or black deaf, it doesn't matter. But when someone does racist behavior, we can support them, but give them the discipline or help them to improve. Give them the opportunity to grow. And that's my thoughts. Ritchie, you hit the nail on the head. It's forgiveness. The deaf community is very well known for forgiving. And Ritchie was a keynote speaker, and he made a lot of awesome points. So just before you want to talk about improving, you want to make improvement. But first, we've got to recognize the problem. We've got to do that deep dive and find out what the problem is first. Make a list what the problem is. I've been certified in 2011, right? And I've already seen problems since that time, since 2011. There's always been problems and issues since that time. First of all, there's no transparency. You take the test, you may fail the test, that's it. You get an F, you fail it, they don't give you any feedback, they don't tell you your area of strength is, there's no transparency in the test. There's no time to discuss a follow-up of what's happened on the test. There's no transparency to the test. When the CDI test was put on hold a while back, that caused people to be in a panic. At least for deaf people. For hearing people, it was all well and good. It took us a long time to finally figure out what the problem was. The test has a cycle. There's a testing cycle. I don't know exactly the number of years. I'm not quite sure. But let's just assume, for now, just for the sake of discussion, let's say it's a 7-year cycle, right? It's a 7-year cycle for a test. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but let's go with 7 years. And as you come near the 6th year of your cycle, when the time of the cycle, the 7th year, they get together and that's when they should improve on the test. Hearing people do that every 7 years. They do that, but they've never put the test for the deaf person aside. They don't monitor the CDI test. They hadn't monitored that, and so the CDI test had lagged behind for 3 years. So because it lagged behind for 3 years, that's why they put it on hold. That was the number one issue. No one was watching. No one was monitoring. No hearing person saying a hearing person was watching it. Right. That hearing person, it was a bad apple. Maybe there was. I don't know. But that's the issue. That's one issue. Secondly, I got up at the street leverage in Boston. The street leverage. I got up and I challenged RID. I said, "Why are you encouraging CDIs to take the tests? You support the CDIs to take the standard paper. You say that in the paper. While the chapters across the United States won't accept opportunities for CDIs. The states will not accept opportunities for practicing CDIs. It's not standardized." At that time, street leverage, when I got up, I realized, my husband was ready to move out of the state. And so I had several options about where I wanted to work. And I didn't want any of those. That state that really looked down on deaf interpreters, and I didn't want that because they looked down on deaf interpreters. So I told street leverages at the conference, I'm not going to these states where they frown upon deaf interpreters. I want you to offer this stuff. I want you to offer. Can you offer job opportunities for me? Be honest. I don't want you to just give me the head nod. Can you give me you can promise me I have a job opportunity? And they couldn't promise that. I said, that's my point. So already at the national level, it should not monitoring the CDI test. The point is, that's why I decided to move to Georgia. Georgia, I knew maybe if maybe my certified would lapse. Maybe I wouldn't to interpret. I didn't know anything about Georgia. Georgia was a place. When I moved to Georgia, I was surprised. I got work. I was lucky. I had a job, so I was relieved by that. So I was okay. Again, it's RID should have some standards, but they don't. And again, Ritchie made this great point last at the keynote at NDI opening night. He said, RID should recognize it. If he recognizes a hearing space, it's a hearing space, and it's huge. You got 15,000 members, all of them hearing. And 300 deaf members, or 400 maybe. So I mean, think about the size. It's like I don't know what's coming to my head, but when like the Bible story, it's like what popped in my head is David and Goliath. It's like you're trying to hit the stone in the giant's head, but it's real bullshit. It's not true. Autism, racism. It's no wonder. I knew it. It's obvious because the number, when you come out the count by numbers, it's there. There are many factors, there are layers in the selection. I don't need to talk about them because Ritchie did, but I have strong anger feelings about that. I'm really done with RID. I want to just I'm going to rip up my certification. I'm so distraught over RID. There are like many interpreters, especially BioPOC interpreters, who have said, okay, here I am. What can I do to support the BIPOC interpreters? Particularly those who couldn't get certified. Now they're demanding now there's a requirement for a BA degree. Okay, so now a BA degree is required, and then there's an alternate pathway. So I already had this alternate pathway, but it turned into a big mess. So I decided I wouldn't follow that. So what's going to happen in the future? I'm really not sure. But all this has been going on for quite some time. So this is old news, really. It's really up to RID should recognize there's a problem. But the problem has been there way before this current issue. Ritchie, I've watched your comments. And Mikey, I've watched your comments as Pam. And also the experience you've had of racism, and even based from white to black. So it gives me pause and gives me several questions. When you look at RID, it represents the code of ethics. Have they violated the code of ethics based on their performance as a professional interpreter? Are they not following the RID code of ethics or code of professional conduct? Should they not be advocating, encouraging you to promotion? I looked at that as a violation and not showing integrity. Why did they hide it under the rug? Why did they hide Pamela's story under the rug? They're not hiding what's happening. Why did they hide things under the rug from Pamela? Why didn't they show what was going on? And from her experience, it looks like they weren't as supportive for people at BIPOC. I support all the things that everyone has talked about, what Ritchie has talked about, what Mikey has talked about. So maybe we need to talk about this more. I value all of your different people. I see people of color, I can see different people at who you are, and I'm listening to all your stories, and I'm wondering, do you think that these experience, what these stories have shown that people have broken the code of ethics with RID. Jason again. So RID developed CPC. Many deaf and even hearing realized that to develop the goal of interpreting service. They thought that was the goal. They didn't develop things for 24/7 RID. RID was not created, not developed any teaching. The CPC was just about the process of interpreting. And what happened during interpreting, if it was illegal, that applied to the CPC. If what happened was illegal, they could file that. So if it wasn't related directly to interpreting, they really haven't violated the CPC. So many people don't realize that the CPC and RID failed to teach that. And also, NAD, plus many other organizations like NBDA, and the list goes on, of other deaf organizations, were not involved with what personal interpreters look like. It looks like RD had made all these decisions all along. And they said that's what interpreting looks like. So many interpreters in their practicum program, the interpreter training programs, most of them are run by hearing people. They feed in hearing people. Hearing people, the ones, like I'd say 95% are hearing people running these programs. So how many deaf people are involved, or how many people of color, or BIPOC? There's just a few. So RD has really failed to do that. And so they've dismissed and marginalized other groups in the community. NAD, NBDA, NDI, and the list goes on. All these should be involved to explain to give the idea of a robust explanation of what interpreting looks like. And they should say, look RD, this is what it should look like. They should be involved. So yeah, I think also that for CDI, I think you're right. Mikey's right. I mean, I don't feel supported at all. And even hearing people think that CDIs are used for, like deaf language, for someone who's has high visual. So there's a lot of misconception on how CDIs are used, the purpose of CDIs, and that has been historically the same problem. RD again has failed to clear what that is, and it's quite annoying. I spent several $1,000s to maintain my certification. And after that, all I've got is a piece of paper. I'm lucky I can get a job. I can go 200, 300 miles for a job. So there really are many issues that I feel we need to discuss. And now the CEO, Star, she hasn't made any announcement. So I want to follow up with what Jason said. The responsibility of driving, the mileage. Imagine that all the money to pay for that certification is really not enough. I did have experience with a few of my friends who are CDIs. I'm also a DI. I'm not certified. So I don't trust RID. I don't know if I do trust it actually. I'm really on the fence. I got my own reasons. So I'm wanting to see. I have my own reasons, but I'm not sure if I trust RID. My friends who are CDI say that the assignments they're given are few and far between. Maybe it could also be like Mikey said, that they prefer hearing interpreters. As Mikey said, it might also be because they don't want bad POC interpreters. Sometimes there were requests they asked for a CDI and they're ignored. Sometimes it's also that they just prefer the agencies will hire hearing interpreters and brush deaf interpreters off to the side. So the CEO, Pam, you were saying in 2019, and this new CEO, 2021 means that every 2 years of CEO, or or just depends on what does it depend upon? You mentioned also Mikey said about the you need a degree, but people who are who want to become Spanish interpreters are not required to have a degree, a BA degree. How fair is that? I don't understand that. Thirdly, some hearing interpreters don't support CDI. They want to brush CDI aside, and they want to do that. I've seen it myself where they brush the CDI aside on a job. So the three things I wanted to mention. Yep, Mikey. Yeah, the label of the stigma of using a CDI is that deaf people aren't smart. That's the stigma that goes along with CDI. And I don't know whoever fed that idea. May have been fed along at the start. Maybe at the start. Maybe in the early days. Maybe that's what they're trying to interpret. But the reasons that we use interpreters are so varied now. We do everything. I mean, almost everything, right? Platform interpreting. I've seen platform interpreting. I noticed that, like, when I was platform interpreting, I look at the deaf interpreter because it's true ASL. I'm a certified deaf interpreter, right? And when I'm in the hospital and a doctor comes in and a hearing interpreters come with him, I'll say, Mikey, your treatment is not successful. You have 4 weeks left to live. Let's just think about this, right? That was the case. The hearing interpreters would have already had a problem come up. The hearing interpreter says, hearing culture means that they're going to, the hearing culture, they'll try to, they'll beat around the bush and we'll get to the issue. Then when the hearing person hears that, they get nervous. I need to have a CDI that comes in and says the whole thing right away. Your treatment is no good. You're going to die in 4 weeks. You got 4 weeks left. I suggest you do what you can now. And if I got that, that means that the job is done. I would get the actual understanding. CDI's role is to make things clear and right to the point. How clear? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how clear it is. How they make it clear doesn't matter. Maybe they draw a picture, show something in a book. But to get creative, that creates a skill. And not all deaf interpreters can become interpreters. Not all deaf people can become interpreters. There's a lot of processing that goes along. So a CDI needs more. It means more. It's about language. It's a unique language. It's not about things. It's like ULT. Unique means different. It's not just ASL. It's different. It doesn't mean their minds are no good or they can't think. Maybe they don't have the experience, but they have the life experience, even if they don't have the actual school experience. And I want to mention that NDI, I noticed that we mentioned NDI. Yeah, the National Deaf Interpreter was set 14 years ago because of this. We got together to become a standard, get standardized for deaf interpreters. That's why we created this group. And now someone mentioned that NDI is going to take over the certification test. I have to say, hold the phone. It's new. We just started for it recently. Maybe in the future, when we have a bigger body of interpreters, a bigger group, maybe then we come with certification. But it's up to you. It's up to the community. Thank you. I have a question. Does RD look at your right to have just any interpreter, or is it your right to have the interpreter that matches who you are? Legally it says when you go to healthcare, when you go to healthcare, the client will say to the nurse or the doctor, I want you to match my communication access, and I'll say specifically who they want, and they'll say they want a CDI interpreter, CDI. Does the law look at that as saying no? As long as they get an interpreter, that's fine. Doesn't matter who it is. We can get we get an interpreter, or do they know? Do they recognize that the person is asking for someone on their health for someone who is qualified to match that person? And that hurts our community because we don't witness that to talk to any healthcare or other workers, the other people who are hiring these interpreters. So what are the rules what are the RID rules about that? Okay, let me clarify. RID doesn't look for qualified interpreters to meet the company's needs. And agencies do that. Depends on the agency. RID does not do. RID has no role on hiring interpreter. They're supervising. It's a supervisory role. I think I want Mikey can answer that question better. If you can add and clarify if I'm right. Yeah, Ritchie probably better. Or Paula. Paula, you want to clarify this? Well, I'll try to answer your question from before. Not that one. I want to talk about the question before. Someone asked about the contract, right? Did someone ask about the question about the contract? I just want to clarify that when we were in negotiations, they bring up it was a 2-year contract. It wasn't a 2-year contract. It was 5 years. So the new CEO, I have no idea what her term is, how long her term is. I just want to clarify that. I think it's a board decision on how many years. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so a few things, few layers to this question. Qualified communication it's a very complex issue. If you pass in your certification, it doesn't mean you're at the top of the game. It means you met the minimum requirements. The minimum requirements, we have to take it's based on a score based on the minimum. So, for example, a teacher who graduates college when they pass the test, is not considered to be at the top of his or her game. They have the minimum requirements, and then they learn skills to become the top interpreter. And the same thing with the doctor. The doctor who passes their medical boards, they're not at the top of their game. Neither is for a lawyer. And all these tests show that you pass minimum competency. For doctors, for lawyers, they're required to practice. Get years as a junior to get experience, or like another license required. So every 4 years they take a test to make sure that their skills are comparable or they've gone up. So there are various ways. That's how we look on how the system will work. There are a few workshops offered about building the skills. There's really no thing to require us. For example, you can all see me? Okay. So, for example, there's no requirement to show that you've gone up in levels in your signing. It's just based on the cycle that you maintain your CEUs. So for us to evaluate interpreting skills, we're praying, we hope that the workshops will help us pull up our skills. But you don't show that you've actually graduated. So there are all different kinds of interpreters and different kinds of agencies. And they're really the gatekeepers. The agencies are the gatekeepers. And it may also be a question of not just quality, but will it be a question of payment? And just because someone's qualified doesn't mean they're going to make the full interpretation. So this discussion has really shows RD to we're opening up this full discussion. How do we get RD to recognize this? Do we write a letter? Do we talk to them about it? The discussion that we are having here, how do we get RID to recognize it? All here is clever, but they're wrong. They've convinced the states, the law, the language, that all you need is RD certification. Many states are stuck because the law says you must have RD certification. No other certification is compatible in the language of the state laws. So RD has played it smart, although they're wrong. So that's where it is. Our time is running out. So anything you'd like to add before we close? Mikey and Ritchie, and anything you want to say before we close? We have like 6 minutes left. James, you go first. What I'd like to add is, as a DI, I think an NDI conference is a really good start for the CDI. I'd like NDI to build stuff up, partner things, and how we can to improve things in R&D. I think it's a really good idea, but the way to do it is still something we need to work on. I say we keep our eyes on it and see how things progress. Yeah, I'm going to be short and sweet. RD needs the competition. That'll keep honest. That'll keep RD honest. Yeah, and also the last thing is NDI. Remember, it's just 4 years old. Excuse me, interpreter said 14 when it's 4 years old. So you want to be raised. You want a 4-year-old child to run your run a university? How would you like that? How can a 4-year-old know how to run university? You have to teach the 4-year-old you have to teach a 4-year-old, right? So we're still in our infancy. We've gotten together and we can all the ideas, and we're still growing. And we think in years, in 2 or 3 years, we'll know where our path leads. And if we do that, when we'll be in competition with RID. And that would mean that right now what we need to do is keep on talking and keep on talking, keep on getting their attention, make them uncomfortable, keep on giving them good trouble, and keep on pressing. Jason, was something you want to add? I want to say thank you all for being a part of the discussion. We'd like to continue this on. We can discuss this later on. I'd like to get other individuals as well and more interpreters too. I want to recognize the different people involved to see what's been happening, how this can be how this has affected our community. And after that, we can discuss with you. Maybe we could have another panel again until RID recognizes and supports us. I want to give you all thanks, and also really, I want you to thank you for giving us your time, because we are not never in your shoes. So thank you for giving us an insight in your experiences. Thank you all, and good night.
Make laws. Both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate share the building's history. Remember this statue from the top of the dome? This is the original plaster model that was